And without further ado, let's get started. So key biodiversity areas are, as many of you will know, sites that contribute significantly to the persistence of nature. In other words, they're important nature areas, the places that if we lost, we'd be losing really key pieces of our ecological and evolutionary history here in Canada or even across the entire planet. Key biodiversity areas integrate a lot of the lessons that we've learned from previous designations and standards, like important bird areas or important reptile and amphibian areas. And so they include all species, they cover all species, all ecosystems, and a couple of other key quantitative ecological parameters as well. We identify key biodiversity areas using the global KBA standard or national KBA standard for threatened species, geographically restricted or rare species, sites that are important for biological processes or ecological integrity of broader ecosystems and landscapes. And we can also identify KBAs for irreplaceability. There's a couple of different quantitative criteria that we have, but the important thing to note is that all of these KBAs have in common that they hold something incredibly unique, something incredibly special, and something just incredibly cool. And these KBAs are always sites, places that can be managed, and if they need to be protected, and if they don't need to be, celebrated. A lot of the KBAs that we're identifying are incredibly special places because of the previous conservation efforts and stewardship of incredible groups like we'll hear about today. This is a very collaborative effort across the country. The brain center of the KBA program in Canada is Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, Birds Canada, and NatureServe Canada. But there are a whole huge coalition of groups that play a huge role as well, like Nature Conservancy of Canada, WWF, Nature Canada, and a whole bunch of provincial and territorial and federal government partners as well. And of course, we couldn't do any of this work to map out these important areas without the huge network of experts across the country as well who participate into the KBA process too. And so this is a huge collaborative effort. To date, we've identified over 700 sites across the country, well over 700 now. This is a map from the summer, and so there are quite a few new places to add on this map now. And a lot of these are based on existing important bird areas by Birds Canada and BirdLife International. A lot of these are new areas, though, around species that have historically been underappreciated or are just not birds and haven't had areas identified for them. And as we start to map out these areas and as we start to go through this process, we're starting to think more and more about, less about identification and more about the implementation. What are we going to do with this information once we map out all of these important areas across the country? How will that be used for decision making, for research, for communities, and for just getting people to appreciate nature? Over the course of the next months, we'll be in this monthly webinar series, which this webinar is a part of, exploring a little bit more of those topics in depth about how KBAs can be implemented and inform conservation across Canada. Of course, today, we're really excited to talk about how key biodiversity areas might be able to build from existing multi-taxa models and promote conservation engagement within these areas. So how can we learn from the lessons of Mark Stabb from Nature Conservancy of Canada, Margaret Lidkea and Wylie Thomas? How can we learn from lessons of programs already that highlight species that are not as charismatic as birds or caribou, or and build from these lessons? So I'd highly recommend as well. This is the part 2 of a little bit of a mini series. Part 1 was focused more on birds, building off of lessons from Birds Canada's caretaker program. We had a great set of speakers there as well, and I'd highly recommend, if you haven't seen part 1, check that out on our website later. But for now, I am extremely excited to welcome our speakers. I'm going to close my screen share and allow the first of our speakers, Mark Stabb, to take over. So Mark, if you want to start sharing your screen, that would be awesome. Mark is of Nature Conservancy Canada's Central Ontario East region. He's the program director for this area and oversees the conservation projects across especially Rice Lake Plains on the Oak Ridges Moraine, in the limestone landscape of the Napanee Plain and around Prince Edward County, and the islands of the shores of eastern Lake Ontario coast. Before he was with NCC, Mark worked as a biologist and a park planner for the Government of Ontario, and also as a teacher at a community college, as a wetland program manager, and as a freelance writer and ecological consultant. He lives with his partner in Uxbridge, where he can frequently be found walking the trails and searching for flying squirrels in particular. I am really excited to hear from you, Mark. Right now, we just see your desktop, so you might have to share your presentation.
How's that?
Yep, now we can see the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, good to go?
Yeah, now you're good to go. We can see the full slide. So Mark, take it away.
Yeah, there's sometimes a bit of a delay there, so thanks so much for having me as part of this series. I got excited to start thinking about KBAs as I heard the program evolving associated with IBAs, but now looking beyond that. And this, the landscape going to be talking about now is a potential candidate. But before I go ahead, I'd like to just mention that I am from Uxbridge, Ontario, which is up in the hills north of Toronto, and it's the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Mississauga, and the Anishinaabe people. We'll be talking about the landscape that's covered by the Williams Treaties, and we have a direct connection with Alderville First Nation, and that's been one of the kind of pleasures of my career to work with that community in various ways over the years, and we'll talk about the role of those relationships in a partnership like the Rice Lake Plains Joint Initiative. So I'm presuming we see the presentation, conservation engagement in Rice Lake Plains. We call it the Tall Grass Awakening because I'll show you some slides about some of the remnant habitats up on this high and dry oak ridges moraine that NCC, Nature Conservancy of Canada, and other partners have been trying to restore with some degree of success over the last 20 years or so. Okay, so just making sure that this is rolling. So we're a leading conservation organization in the country. We've directly protected about 2 million hectares of land, but then in partnership with others and various other ways, tools, and mechanisms have helped support 15 million hectares protected across the country, and more to come. Here in Ontario, about 84,000 hectares have been protected in various ways with involvement of lots of support. And I do want to say thank you to anybody here as an NCC supporter or donor or partner who worked with us across the country. You notice that NCC is part of the overall steering committee related to KBAs, which is exciting. And even if you're not a direct supporter of NCC, we do get support from provincial and federal governments when we match these funds with private donations. So your tax dollars are being invested strategically in places like the landscape you'll be hearing about here today. So thank you for your support in various ways. Notice Lake Ontario here, Toronto in the bottom left, and that squiggly green line more or less represents a big, long moraine that was left behind after the glaciers called the Oak Ridges Moraine, high and dry, sandy and gravel landscape that to the east in particular has very dry, arid conditions in a way that support tall grass ecosystems. So often you think of the tall grass prairies of Manitoba, or else actually throughout the north central US and Midwest. It was once a vast ecosystem, now down to a very small, tiny number of remnants compared to what it once was. And including about 70,000 hectares that used to be in Ontario, and only 3% of that remains. So it's a globally significant habitat, and there's a cluster of those sites. If you notice here in the brown on the map that should be popping up there, that's where we've been focusing our attention over the last 20 years or so to try and get involved at a landscape scale to help restore individual sites and a network of sites in partnership with others. Just a quick recap of what these communities represent. You think of the word tall grass, and it's not just prairie. It's a whole array of habitats that are associated with very dry conditions, often fire resilient, fire dependent communities, going from sand barren in the upper left, and we've got all these communities on some of our properties. Tall grass prairie with less than 10% tree cover. We've got sporadic locations across our province, including Northumberland County, north of Lake Ontario. Oak savanna, and you hear this term, 10 to 25% tree cover, and even oak woodland with black oak in particular is quite a globally significant habitat compared to what it once was before. So these whole array of dry habitats are all tied together through an array of indicator plant species that thrive in these dry conditions. When there's fire, for example, it's not part of the landscape. So these include butterfly weed, prairie buttercup, wild lupin, and butterfly milkweed. And there's a whole list of these indicator plants that kind of bring these communities together as one complex and one spectrum of habitats that are sustained in those dry habitats up in the moraine and elsewhere. So I know KBAs are often wildlife focused. We came at this project from an ecosystem perspective, from a community perspective. So the focus on restoring those habitats for the benefit of the communities themselves, but also for the species that are associated with them. Here's an eastern hognose snake, was a species at risk that is clustered in a number of our properties in the Rice Lake Plains. We also have a butterfly called mottled dusky wing, and it's a bit of a stronghold in Northumberland County at some of the sites that we manage, and also sites managed by Alderville First Nation. And then near and dear to many people's hearts on the call today are birds, and the grassland bird community is thriving in the sites that we've helped restore and expand year by year by year, getting them to the point they will attract most of the grassland birds that would be in that landscape. So grasshopper sparrow on the left, bluebird, even upland sandpiper, which like those bigger habitats to some degree. So it's about wildlife, about habitat, but increasingly we're realizing that grasslands have a real important role to play in carbon sequestration. I'll just throw this slide in here just for a quick reminder that these grasses have massive root systems, and even though the tops may burn off, those root systems are retained in the ground, and they help to secure carbon. And so grasslands are getting a lot more attention these days for that purpose in particular. You might be hearing more about that over time. So just to go back to the Rice Lake Plains, black oak savanna in particular, also woodlands and prairies are endangered ecosystems in North America, and NCC is committed to helping to restore them in Ontario. We're also quite active in Manitoba and the prairies and that tall grass landscape as well. So we are committed to partnerships and community engagement, and I've been involved with the Rice Lake Plains project even before I was with NCC from a partnership perspective. So I'll talk more about that coming up. So back in about year 2000, 2001 or so, NCC identified this landscape as important. Was a product called a conservation blueprint. I think your KBA planners are aware of those documents that identified important places for biodiversity conservation. The Rice Lake Plains, which is between Lake Ontario, which is to the south, and Rice Lake to the north, have an array of designations and land ownerships and partners there who are associated with these remnant tallgrass communities. Some are very degraded, some are very small remnants left compared to what they once were. So in order to have a big impact, a landscape scale impact, NCC formed what was called the Rice Lake Plains Joint Initiative. And that was formed about 2002. And that was before I joined NCC. I was with another stewardship group doing work in the landscape that were brought together by NCC to say, collaborate on this, raising awareness of and helping promote protection and then steward directly these globally significant habitats. So we have an MOU, a shared vision, and so on. Eventually, it was rebranded as the Rice Lake Plains Partnership. You can go to the website to find out more about that, racelakeplains.ca. And for almost 20 years now, 20 years starting next year, we've met and collaborated and helped coordinate conservation efforts in this broad landscape with a focus on tallgrass, but not expressly on tallgrass alone. And these are our current array of partners that have been involved with us for quite some time. As I say, there is a shared vision of working together. We share information, we share lists of volunteers, we promote each other's events, and we also have done fundraising for collaborative projects. So we often do our own work in parallel, but we also have fundraised over time in different periods of time to do collaborative kind of conservation communications. So we had joint newsletter, for example, publications that we share with others, pamphlets raising awareness about in this case, the eastern hognose snake, asking folks to report and also learn more about this very harmless but super cool snake that acts like a cobra, but it's harmless, totally harmless. Interpretive signs as well. And I know that IBA sites in Ontario have often seen, these IBA related signs raising awareness about the importance and the whole array of partners that are represented there. We've done the same with raising awareness about tallgrass ecosystems, prairie, savanna, woodland, etc. over time. And we also spent a lot of time kind of recognizing and celebrating. So at one point we had a landowner appreciation program, folks who had tallgrass communities on their sites that we're trying to encourage additional stewardship of, but also celebrations of all the work that's been gone on. Alderville First Nation Black Oak Savanna has been and remains the shining light of tallgrass restoration and maintenance in Northumberland County, and we've learned so much from them. We've had mentors from that community help us learn from their experiences and traditional ways of maintaining that habitat. And they've also welcomed us on their reserve at their Black Oak Savanna protected site for a Prairie Day, where we celebrate all things prairie. We also have our own Hazel Bird Day, and we invite the partners there. So it's a real community that's been forged over decades to collaborate around this theme of tallgrass restoration and conservation. This is a bit of a fuzzy shot. It's a slide that has been scanned. This is one of my favorite photos, actually. We had an instance where we were able to help acquire land to add to the First Nation reserve, the Black Oak Savanna protected site. And this was actually a celebration of that contribution. And so there's a long story behind it, but on the right is Rick Beaver, the elder who was the pioneer of that Black Oak Savanna restoration site, and holding the sign is Dave Mowat. Now he's the chief of Alderville First Nation, but at the time he was kind of a board member of this Black Oak Savanna project. And we're laughing our heads off here because we gave him this sign as a gift giving, and he hated snakes at the time. So that's why it's so funny. Decades later, he's actually said he's been picking up snakes, and he's advanced over the years. Anyway, so very proud of the relationship we have there, and there's much more we can do over time when the time is right, when the community is able to work on projects of mutual interest. So there's a lot more we can do together. So all these partners, the conservation authorities, the naturalist clubs, the land trusts, are all committed to helping to restore these tallgrass ecosystems on their land and also promote it with others. And these are some of the techniques that all of us are applying. And these are all volunteers, by the way, planting and seeding our tallgrass site. With these orange grasses you see, those are some of the tall grasses there, big blue stem, little blue stem, switchgrass, that sort of thing. So planting and seeding, controlling invasive species through pulling and also through the use of various chemicals. Sometimes that's the only way. Removal of Scotch pine, which is a non-native tree species planted to help control erosion, but now has grown like a dandelion across many of these tallgrass sites. So removing Scotch pine, here's an example of us doing it at the Hazel Bird Nature Reserve 2014 above, and 2018 where we removed all that. Notice to the right, private land that we have yet to acquire. The Scotch pine there just marches in from that vast plantation, and one of these days we'll help secure that property, I hope, and restore that one as well. Planting and seeding, tending, using native plants, local plants to grow them with local growers, and outplanting, that sort of thing. Collecting local seed. So it's a great community effort. All these partners have been involved with those exercises. And also prescribed burning. So fire, controlled fire, well, natural fire are one of the key drivers to maintain these tallgrass ecosystems. That high and dry conditions help, but the burns are central to many of the community, one of the species being maintained on the landscape. And so these are, for the most part, spring burns, controlled ground burns, set under very specific conditions. and it helps to push back succession, which continues in the absence of disturbance, and fosters the growth of many of these tall grass indicator species, that sort of thing. So one of the things that we've done together, and that was when we first started, there wasn't really a prescribed burden program. We helped develop a prescribed burden program, and together we've communicated the importance of that, all the partners in the community, which is really tremendously helpful to have a broad network of support for that, which could be a controversial exercise, but it really, especially recent years, controlled burns have shown to be of benefit to control potential wildfires. Finally, thinning is a new technique that's been proven to work across the range of this habitat when fire is not enough. When this was an open-grown oak that was completely covered with young poplar and pine, and now we've restored it and helped it to regrow once again. So here's, for example, a thinning operation where there was a former woodland here, and we removed sort of the early succession trees to restore these open savanna conditions that were once there. So multiple techniques to restore things on these properties. So it could be ours, could be the conservation authorities, could be land trust, Alderville First Nation as well. Repeated action means that these sites are coming awake again. They are being restored and expanded to provide more habitat, particularly for birds, but other wildlife species as well. So here's one example. The beautiful pink flowers are a weed called spotted knapweed. This is before when we first got the property in 2010 or so, and now 2020, 2021, this is all native tall grass prairie at one of these sites through a lot of blood, sweat, toil, and tears. One of the also benefits of this larger group is that they share information and encourage people to work with other partners to volunteer. And that volunteer program has had a big impact on all of our properties. This is just one example of 7 volunteers coming to plant a couple thousand trees, plants, I should say. So that's a big part of the partnership, is sharing and being willing to share these sort of resources, which are native or local volunteers. So just to kind of quickly wrap up about some of the lessons learned and so on, and what the next steps are. This is where our study area was when we first started, and now we've expanded. This is in the center. You see this sort of dark brown. That was sort of where we once were doing our planning. And when the Rice Lake Plains Partnership started, that's where our focus was. In recent years, we've expanded the project dramatically, and what that has meant, these partners become much more engaged in the planning of this project, because it takes in all the area they have an interest in, not just the small focused area that we were targeting. So they got more involved in identifying the planning area, the boundaries, the biological targets, the priorities for them. And I wouldn't say exactly that they see it as their plan, but they see themselves more as part of it. And then as time goes on, the plan may become more of a partnership plan versus the NCC plan that they had some input into. But that was a great step to take, is kind of broaden that interest, and it got the local community much more engaged in things that they were interested in. Here's just one example. This is at Hazelbird Nature Reserve, north of Baltimore, Ontario. This is the appraiser we had come out to the property in, say, 2010. All that behind you is Scotch pine that we've now removed, and now we're restoring to prairie and savanna conditions. So, and it's just things do change, and you can restore these things over time, given patience and resources. I do want to mention the Kirtland's warbler, because our site now is being considered as a potential restoration site for the habitat for Kirtland's warbler. I know some of you folks in Ontario may have an interest in KBAs, but I'll give a shout out to Dr. Paul Aird, and he was a professor of mine at U of T who was always searching for the Kirtland's warbler, and people kind of thought he was a little bit I'm not sure what the word would be, but he was dedicated to find this bird, and eventually the bird came back, and the bird is in Ontario. It's all quite, what's the word for it? It's confidential where these sites are, but it is making a comeback, and they're looking at these sites as potential for restoring that particular species. So quick other partnerships. We use this model actually and tried to apply it in other locations. You've heard, I think, from the South Shore Joint Initiative. that we've shared actually our MOU with them as they were first getting started. We're not part of that initiative. We're allied with them as a parallel entity. They've got to get much more involved in advocacy that NCC can't get involved with, but we can provide that parallel science stewardship support for that really amazing community initiative that's having big impact in the county. And we tried to get one going in Napanee Plain, and both of these sites are IBAs, by the way. And the Napanee Plain one's a little bit more quiet. It probably doesn't have the same very specific goal of a conservation project to kind of coalesce around to have it really emerge as another larger and much more engaged partnership. McMahon Bluff here is one of the sites that we're hoping to expand the IBA and the Prince Edward County South Shore to encompass when the KBA proposal comes in, because it's a really cool endangered plant at that location. So just a quick thank you to anybody who's supported us and a variety of foundations, including the good old Oak Ridges Moraine Foundation, Friends of the Greenbelt, etc., and to volunteers and our staff. So yeah, as Val was saying, why not come and join us? You're always going to use some help. I know it might be a while distance to come from Victoria, but anybody who wants to volunteer would be very welcome. So thanks for your time. I look forward to questions after our friend's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, long road trip from Victoria, but a shorter one from Ottawa. So looking forward to taking you up on that offer sometime. Thank you for a great presentation. If you want to stop your screen share, then Wylie, you can start yours, and I'll introduce our audience to our next two speakers, Margaret Lidkea and Wylie Thomas from the Friends of Uplands Park. I was going to say where that is, but I'll let Wylie and Margaret reveal that secret on their first presentation slide. Margaret is the co-founder and president of the Friends of Uplands Park Society. She grew up in Victoria as a self-described free-range child, climbing Gary oak trees. She studied at the University of BC for zoology and teaching, but her passions have always been getting children outdoors, connecting with the natural world, and making a difference. She's won several awards, including Oak Bay's Wall of Fame and BC Community Achievement Award. Wylie Thomas is a restoration practitioner and conservation biology based in a city which I'll let him reveal, and among other things has managed since 2014 a federally funded project to restore critical habitat for 14 species at risk act listed species in the Uplands Park. He's the current vice president of Friends of Upland Park, and that organization, and he and Margaret have been instrumental in organizing community engagement in that project and in helping the district of Oak Bay and its success for bids for federal funding. I'll turn it over to you two to step us through.
Thank you, Peter. I'll just share my screen, and hopefully it'll all work. And I'm going to turn my video off. Give me a second here. Can you see my presentation?
It looks good, yeah.
Okay, good. So thanks, Peter, for the introduction. Margaret and I are really happy to be here to share with you the experience of Friends of Uplands Park in marshaling, community resources and interest in stewarding Uplands Park, and helping in its conservation. The park is home to rare or critically endangered Gary oak ecological communities and 20 species at risk. And what you see here is what Uplands Park looks like in the spring. Margaret and I have work together regularly. We both sit on the board, as you mentioned, and we work in the park very often together. But as you mentioned in the introduction, I also am the manager of the federally funded project on behalf of Oak Bay. So we have different roles, but we work extremely well together. And Margaret has really been instrumental in helping us achieve the goals of the project, and also in the municipality's successful request for funding from the federal government. Just a brief outline of what we'll talk about today. We're going to take turns. I'll start off with the what. What is at stake, what are the threats, and what has been done to date. And Margaret will talk about the how she started a small organization from scratch and built it into something much bigger that in 2021 contributed $85,000 in-kind contribution to stewardship in the park. And we'll end with a few photos of volunteer events. So for those of you who don't know where Uplands Park is, it's located in the district of Oak Bay, which is at the southeastern corner of Vancouver Island. It's actually part of Greater Victoria, so it's a very urban environment. And we're about equidistant to Vancouver and Seattle. And very importantly, we lie in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains, which really affects our climate, so that we get actually a lot less rain than the mainland does. And we have very distinct wet and dry seasons, and this is what supports the rare Garry Oak and associated ecological communities in our region. Yeah, so most of our rain falls in the winter, and we have a dry, very dry summer. It's considered a cool Mediterranean climate. So here's a close-up of Oak Bay, and you can see it has a lot of coastline, and most of that coastline is occupied by housing. And it has about 25 parks, not including the such things as, you know, sports fields and the like, but 49 hectares of natural area parkland. And all of these parks contain mainly critically imperiled Garry Oak ecosystems. So, and they host, these ecosystems are host to, or have the highest biodiversity of any terrestrial ecosystem in BC, and we have very little of it left. The number that's floated around is 5%. It's in our region, it's probably less than 1%, and I would say it's probably less than that if you're looking at uncompromised examples of the ecosystem. So we have 25 species at risk. They're located in 5 parks. And you can see the one we're going to be focusing on is Uplands Park. That's where most of the investment in stewardship has gone. And then there's one at the bottom, Gonzales Point, that's actually part of the Royal Victoria Golf Course. So it's on private land, but we do have a restoration project in that area as well. So this is an example of the critically imperiled Garry Oak ecological community. This happens to be taken from the central meadow of Uplands Park. And you see, you know, the typical oak tree there, and then the meadow, flower meadows around it. The purple flower you see is our iconic camas. And it's also home to 17 species at risk. So in that very short, small area, about 1 hectare, we have 17 species at risk. And just to give you an idea of the same area 4 months later, this is what it looks like, very dry. So here's some examples of flowers from typical of the meadows. You'll notice in the bottom right, you can see camas, which is our sort of iconic, I guess, our charismatic species, if you can call a flower charismatic. And we also have, well, in the whole municipality, we have 25 species at risk. In Uplands Park, we have 20. And of note are the Victoria owl's clover, which is, they probably have about 5 or 6 places in the world where it's found. One of them is at Cattle Point, which is part of Uplands Park. We have bearded owl clover, which is listed as endangered by the federal government. It could actually be a lot more endangered than that. There is a researcher who's looking at the plant and thinks it actually might be an undescribed taxon, which would make it even rarer, and also endemic to the Victoria region. Water plantain buttercup is another plant we have more than half of the Canadian population. It's only found in 2 places, one of which is Uplands Park. And then bear's foot sanicle, which is very pretty. It used to be found in the park, but it's since been extirpated, but we can still find it in some of the other parks in the region. So some of our threats, we have, well, lots of threats. I would say the big one is, well, for sure the big one is invasive plants, particularly Scotch broom. So here you see some Scotch broom growing as tall as the oak trees in the back. And they will take over a meadow and convert it to shrubland and destroy it, basically. And then the other threat is from recreational users. So here you see Cattle Point, and that's home to 10 species at risk. They're all on the ground there, and these are all the various uses. It's become a very popular destination, and you see people, most of these people are either sitting on a rare plant or standing on one, so not knowing that they are. So Friends of Uplands Park, one thing I should say is Friends of Uplands Park is a much smaller group than the Nature Conservancy because in terms of geography and resources, and the focus has really been on Uplands Park, although it's now expanding. The focus is to create opportunities for stewardship and education and inspiration. That's our mission statement. And we've done a lot of work really in stewardship and in education. So some of the main things that we do is we organize volunteer restoration events. And here you have the figures for 2021. We held 70 events and almost 1,800 hours in volunteer labor towards removing invasive plants and planting native species. And we hosted 46 events for children in 2021, worth about equivalent to 86 hours of programming. And as I mentioned earlier, Friends of Uplands Park has been a key player in the multi-year restoration project in Uplands Park, and they contribute volunteer hours to the federal grant application. So that's a very important part of the application, a key to our success. And all its work is coordinated with Oak Bay Park staff. So a very important part of coordinating the work has been having an invasive plant management plan, and it has a series of action plans per year. And we all attempt to follow that, and it provides sort of a guidance and ensures that everybody's working towards the same goal. We have amazing working and personal relations with pretty much everybody involved, the federal government, the municipal government, and also the volunteers, and a whole army of professional botanists and biologists who help with the project. And we also track volunteer contributions because they're so important to the funding process. So this is an example of the Parks Department and volunteers working together. So here we're trying to deal with a weed called carpet burrweed, and really one of the main ways to treat it is by burning it. And here we have a staff's employee, Oak Bay employee, burning it in a meadow near Cattle Point. But obviously we can't burn in the maritime meadows, so we have volunteers, many of them come and pick the weed out by hand. And so without that, I don't think we get on top of the weed. So as part of Oak Bay's annual report to federal funders, we collect data on the contributions of the community to stewardship in Uplands Park. And this slide provides a good sort of summary of the contributions from the different partners in the 6-year period ending 20 and 21. And overall, you can see that the total contributions to the park was about $1 million in cash and in kind. And you can see that the community contributed about $400,000 in volunteer labor. And I would say, even though there were a lot of people involved, I would say the biggest contributor to that has been Margaret Lidkea in organizing and getting people out to come volunteer. I find this slide is really useful in demonstrating to anyone who wants to know the importance of park stewardship to the community. I think it clearly shows that the park's protection matters to the community, to the District of Oak Bay, and also to the Government of Canada. And we've used this to make the case for to decision makers, like municipal decision makers, to invest more in the park's protections in things like better trails and fencing. And as one thing you might know is that federal funding requires usually a one-on-one matching contribution, but as you can see from this, the contribution is really 2 to 1. So that's allowed us in 2021 to expand, apply for more funding, and then use that funding to do restoration in other parks in the municipality, because until now it's really been focused on Uplands Park. So in terms of successes, definitely through the work of Friends of Uplands Park, there's been an increased appreciation of the natural areas of the park. People understand that it is a gem. It is an ecological treasure. It used to be just a recreational park, but people now understand what's at stake. We've seen, through volunteer botanists counting the various rare species, that there's been an increase in the number of species, and also from the birders, there's been an increase in biodiversity and I guess in bugs. And one thing we're proud of is the invasive plants are coming under control. I mean, it was really overwhelmed by invasives until a few years ago, and we're now expanding to other parks in the municipality that have species at risk. So here's just a picture of a rocky meadow in Uplands Park, and you can see the yellow broom and the purple camas. And then this is after the broom has been removed. But of course, that's, you know, right after. 2 years later, the broom is back because it has a very long soil seed bank. So some of the challenges are for us have been we can't really we can help with labor, but we can't really we can make the case for trail formalization, but that's really something that the municipality can do. We can help with it and provide advice, but really we rely on the municipality to do that, and we really need it. We need better trails and better fencing, and we can't enforce bylaws. The bylaws are often ignored, and it's not because of a lack of will, it's just they don't have the resources to enforce the bylaws. We're also a really popular destination for you know, hikers and dog walkers, and we're right in the middle of a municipality, a big municipality, and so the park is really being loved to death, and it got considerably worse under COVID because we were one of the few parks that remained open in the beginning, and people just poured into the park. And so this has created a whole new group of park users, and to whom we have to get that messaging out about the park and why you have to stick to trails, etc. And I would say one of the challenges also the funders focus on species at risk. We made an application for more funding to do restoration in the other parks in the municipality, but the funders chose only those that had species at risk, whereas it would be nice to have funding for the other parks as well, because they're potentially habitat for species at risk. And then just a reminder of what can happen if you know, recreational use is not managed. On the left, you have in 1957 an endangered maritime meadow, and that same place in 2004 is now just a dirty grassy field. And now I'll just pass it over to Margaret. Margaret, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. So thank you very much for inviting us today, Peter. My name is Margaret, and I started working with guides, and I decided it would be a really good project to get involved, and we need to start doing. I grew up in Ontario. I taught at Swan Lake Nature Sanctuary for 21 years, so I knew a lot of experts that helped to provide expertise and credibility to my project. Plan, and then I gave it to the parks office to obtain permission to take Girl Guides into the parks and remove that. It's important to have experts because that gives your project credibility. My expert was Adolf Cheska, and he joined me at Anderson Hill Park, and we convinced the park managers to allow the girls to go in to specific areas of those two parks. They removed Scotch broom in those areas, and gradually every year, and gradually families became involved in annual broom bashing one weekend in October. And broom bashing was spread throughout guiding, scouting, and the communities on Vancouver Island. I then retired from Swan Lake and formed, co-founded Friends of Uplands Park in 2010. We are a complete grassroots group, completely different from Mark's sort of discussion. So to try and get people interested, the first thing you need to do is host a volunteer event. So you advertise, you give out, when people arrive, you give out information, and then you do a walk and talk. You can hire an expert, you can do it yourself. That's really critical. But the best part is signing up people that are interested and getting their email contact information. And of course, always have a donation jar because you're going to need to buy stuff. Okay, hosting the first meeting, I hosted at my house. I phoned the people on my list. I served refreshments, I wrote my plan, and we brainstormed. We managed to set a mandate, mission, and goals for the steering committee and find out what interests people had to help organize and host working parties or programs or whatever. We even started to talk about our social media accounts needed and creating a bank account. Okay, Wylie, next. Okay, building momentum is really important. The first thing we did was we organized some work parties, and you always have to go to the Parks Department first. It's something where you're going to go and record it. A map is an excellent tool for you to do that, of course. You need permission from for every activity from your Parks Department so they know what's going on. You need to consider insurance. Do parks give you insurance? Tools, resources to help you figure out the best practices to remove your invasive plants. And for us, it's the Karaoke Ecosystem Recovery Team, which is online for people to use. It has all sorts of expertise about this globally endangered ecosystem. You need to advertise, and on your advertisement, put down what volunteers need to bring, what kinds of tools, gloves, and so on, and also what to expect. We don't have any bathrooms at our park, except for maybe a porta potty at the point, at Cattle Point. On the day, I always try to arrive early to welcome people, sign them in, because this keeps a record of hours for grants and also for insurance purposes. I like to explain and teach people how to remove the invasive plants, and then leave the area with all these nice volunteers carrying the equipment. And on the way in there, teach them about this beautiful ecosystem and answer any of the questions that they have and so on. During the event, you really need to honor your volunteers, socialize with them, acknowledge them, and laugh. I like doing a lot of laughing because joy is important. At the end, have volunteers help remove everything, thank people, make sure you thank them, and we usually have refreshments at a tailgate party. I go home and then I send an email to parks to let them know how the program went and where the weeds are for pickup, because they take them to a local invasive plant compost center. Presenting at conferences and workshops is really important. The first one I did was, enlisting volunteers of all ages. I really like the whole idea of having all age groups coming to help. It's much more happy, joyful, and it spreads the word a lot more. So I like volunteers to come because they bring their children and connect the children to the land, and it's a marvelous thing seeing parents teaching their children how to use sharp tools safely. Presenting at conferences and workshops.
Margaret.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Margaret. I want to make sure we have some time for questions, so I'll just give you a 2-minute wrap-up warning.
Okay. Thanks. Presenting at conferences and workshop is really, really important. Okay, Wylie next. And of course, maintaining momentum, treat your volunteers well, acknowledge their work, cater to individual needs, ask volunteers for feedback, recruit leaders from your volunteers, provide learning opportunities, and have celebrations. Maintain good relationships with park managers and your municipal council. Wylie next, educate, because if you are going to get people on board, you need to educate them. So I like to have school programs coming in because I like engaging young volunteers. Children learn their attitudes in very early years, so they need to connect with their natural environment right at the beginning so they know they belong there and they learn to love the natural area, and those people are then going to become the stewards of the future. So without this education, you need to pass on. You wouldn't have your program continue, and you need to pass it on, and you need to create the stewards of the future because of the need of restoration and conservation in our wilderness areas. Be dedicated and persistent, focus on the positive, and don't forget to laugh. Wylie next. Okay, these are our keys to success. Outreach is great, federal funding has raised profile, we're very supportive. We have an Excel spreadsheet that keeps track, access to many pools, lots of professionals, and the one big one I love is the fact that our board is absolutely great. We have an excellent working relationship. Next. This is Tree Appreciation Day. We do this as a celebration with Oak Bay Parks, and we involve the community. You can see little kids doing some planting here. Next. One of our projects is working with the Willow School kids. This area was completely plowed under in the mid-1800s, full of invasive plants, including Norway maple, blocking out all the sunlight. They were removed by Parks Department. The kids removed the ivy. We removed something else, and here they are planting. Every child in the school planted and helped to also put a handful of soil around a Gary oak tree. It was over $12,000. Here's one of our other areas. This is Matt Fairbarns. Here's our treasurer, and he's the rare plant specialist in Western in Victoria, in British Columbia. We are working at Trafalgar Park, which has had tons of gorse. You can see some of the big gorse here. Right here where these kids are standing, they have just finished removing gorse that was twice as tall as they are. Next. Next. That last picture was my little granddaughter helping to water. We like to also educate there she is, educate the public at public programs. This is a tide pool school program down at Cattle Point. Next, and this one here, I like to also use experts from the community. This is one of British Columbia's geology scientists, and she is doing a geology of Cattle Point workshop for people. Our last one had 130 participants. We have a core group of us that works, and here you can see this is American Gothic look. Next. But of course, we do a lot of laughing, and we are not American Gothic people. And I absolutely love Wylie. I couldn't do any of this without Wylie and all his expertise, all his support. And thank you very much for coming today. And don't forget, you can also volunteer in our park. Just check out our website, friendsofuplandspark.org, for information. Okay, thanks, Peter.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Margaret and Wylie. That was also a terrific presentation. It's great to hear kind of the other, a more grassroots perspective as compared to Mark's presentation as well. So thank you both so much. And I love the focus on laughter as well. That's very important, I think, as well. I'd invite our speakers to turn back on their cameras if they'd like. I'll also allow mics and attendees and cameras for our attendees. So if you're watching and you'd like to turn on your camera or your microphone, please do feel free. Although leave it off if you're not speaking, please, so we can hear everyone else clearly. I'll start off with a question in our chat for all of the speakers. How are these Ontario and BC groups integrating or braiding Indigenous knowledge into these restoration initiatives? And I know, Mark, you talked about this already, so maybe we'll start off with you, and then we'll hear what Wylie and Margaret have to say on that one.
Oh, yeah, thanks, and great question. We, NCC, like all conservation groups, are in a transition period to revisit how and when we engage with First Nations. But so much of it depends on one-on-one relations with people in the community. And that's how our relationship built at Aldeville First Nation. The photograph showing Rick Beaver and Dave Moa, they were more or less our mentors in the early days to help us learn the techniques that they've applied to maintaining their tall grass site. We've gone on then to apply on our properties. More recently, we're looking at increasing the amount of seed and plant material, local seed and plant material that's available for restoration projects. As our properties grow and other properties grow, we try to encourage private landowners to get involved. The available local or locally appropriate seed and plant material is a limiting factor for these restoration projects. So we're looking at developing seed orchards and other growing arrangements so that we can harvest seed and plant it elsewhere. But in doing so, we're engaging discussions with Aldeville First Nation and likely others within the Williams Treaties First Nations to investigate seed, what's being termed seed sovereignty, sort of the lineage of seed that comes from First Nation lands, and also the access to resources like that across the landscape for First Nations, for medicines, that sort of thing. So we're having some really interesting discussions about that, and actually that exercise is just beginning right now. So that's a next step for our engagement, is to talk about, you know, production of seed and where it should go and what's the appropriate seed and that sort of thing. And we have lots of laughs. So we love the celebration because there's a lot of hard work that goes into that, as you know, Margaret and Wylie and others too. It was great to celebrate the work, but then also the achievements and seeing what people have been able to accomplish over the years. So,
thank you, Wylie, Margaret. Either of you want to chime in on that question as well?
Probably the aspect that we're trying to establish right now, having some success with, is having the elders talk to classes and share their knowledge of the and how they had used it in the past and what they're currently doing. I know I have made contact with people on the Songhees Council and have had some of their elders go into the local schools in our area here in Oak Bay. So that has been very, very successful. The municipality has involved them in cairns, information cairns around our parks lands, and those cairns have created quite a buzz in terms of information about the Songhees people. And we had they organized a big celebration where the Songhees actually came in with their canoes into Willows Beach, which is right beside Uplands Park. They came in and did a big presentation, and then we had a great celebration there that time. It was very nice. We certainly want to do more with the First Nations. Right now, we have started on another park in Oak Bay, which has quite an Indigenous background, and we're trying to get the school involved in that project together with the elders and have a meeting, and hopefully that will happen, excuse me, at the school this spring. So that's where we are in that regard. We would like a lot more input from them, and that certainly will be on the agenda to try and get them much more involved in what's happening in the park. And we of course, that group, the school that is working up there, doesn't call it Wallbrand Park anymore. We call it Chickawitch Hill because it was the Chickawitch family that lived there. So we're trying to also encourage the Parks Department and the municipality of Oak Bay to formalize some of the Indigenous names, with our parks. So we have both the common name and the Indigenous name for our parks. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Those were brilliant answers. And I know we're coming up on the end of the hour, so I just want to say a huge thank you to all of the audience members. If you have to head out, thanks for joining. I'd like to ask one more question before we all log off, which is just kind of bringing it back to the key biodiversity areas. How do you all, as people who've started these organizations either from the ground up or from more of a bigger level, but then going downwards, how do you see the KBAs being used and the value of them for being able to drive more of these types of organizations and very local conservation initiatives on the ground?
I'll try to weigh in very quickly. It's really valuable to have an outside, internationally recognized set of criteria for identifying these sites, because we can toot our own horns. Margaret and Wylie love your place so much, and the local community does. But to have that outside, externally established set of criteria that get applied to a landscape and then it gets designated, that helps, because a lot of us have been tooting our own horns, like I say, sort of, this is a great spot, it's so rare, etc. But to have an external body identify it as such, I think helps for the cause, for folks who may not be as aligned with the project as we are. Now, having said that, if you don't have that local community support, then when it comes down to it, it won't quite have the same impact. So it kind of it's both levels, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And we know, like all the botanists and biologists know, that these parks contain endangered ecological communities and rare plants, but we don't. It's good to have an organization that says this is a key biodiversity area, and then you can use that in your messaging. It kind of gives it adds to making the case for more investment and what was I going to say? Do you have anything to say, Margaret?
Certainly raised our profile. I think this is an excellent next step.
Yeah, I mean, I had somebody say to me when they were destroying a part of the park, I said, this is, you know, I explained what was it, and he said to me, says who? Yeah. And so I said, says all the biologists and conservation biologists, but that didn't really work. So if you have something like key bios, yeah, I think so. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all again so much. Thank you everybody for the questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to them all, but I'll forward them along to our speakers. And if you have questions you'd still like to get the answer to, please email me, pchaurier@wcs.org, and I'm happy to pass them along and route your questions onward. Yeah, thank you to our speakers, Margaret, Wylie, Mark. It was terrific to hear from you and learn. I wish we could chat for so much longer, so we'll have to have you all back in some fashion or another. I'd highly recommend everybody find your way one way or another to these beautiful places that have been talked about today, or to another KBA near you. Any final words, Margaret, Wylie, Mark?
No, thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining in. And yeah, if we can connect again, hope, happy to, and reach out to us via Peter if you want to find out more.
Thank you so much.
Terrific. Thank you. Everybody have a great day and enjoy some nature near you. Goodbye.
Thanks, folks. See you.